If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Logger Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Logger Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good! Oh, yeah?
Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Logger Line starts now.
Welcome aboard. Welcome back to another new episode of The Logger Line, as always served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbox Brewing. I'm Ben Dubose, your host, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, and contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. I'm joined, as always, by my good friend, co-host, and producer out of Portugal, Paulo Alves, who you can follow on Twitter/X at Paulo Alves NBA. Me, I'm at Ben Dubose. First things first, Happy New Year to all our listeners, and our apologies for the slightly longer wait between episodes. Both Paolo and myself were sick at times over the past couple of weeks, and then you add in the holidays and all the family obligations, and there's just a lot going on. But we're back now, so let's get right into it. Paolo, I'm assuming you're feeling a lot better.
I mean, yeah. First of all, just an aside, I hate the holiday season. It's way too stressful, so I'm happy to be out of it. I got sick in the middle of it, so it was even worse. But hey, I guess being sick gave me more time to watch the Rockets games without, having to wake up too early the day after. But other than that, I mean, the trend I mentioned a couple of pods ago keeps going, where we will never lose more than 3 games in a row, and we will never win less than 2 games in a row.
Yeah. Well, it's a trend that I hope continues because, honestly, if you can stay in the ballpark of 500 and especially slightly above it, which the Rockets have for most of this season, the win streaks slightly outweighing the losing streaks, then you're going to be in a good spot for the play-in tournament in the Western Conference come April. So that would be a phenomenal outcome for this team. We're still not to the halfway point of the NBA season as we're recording this Friday, January 5th. Rockets are 17-15 at the 32-game mark. But yeah, if they continue to alternate winning streaks and losing streaks, as long as there's a little more on the winning side to where you can stay at 500 or above, then this is going to be a very successful season. Now, of course, they are going to be challenged. They're without Dylan Brooks with the oblique strain. We hope that's just a few more days, but obliques are tricky. Just ask the Astros and Jose Altuve and Yordan Alvarez. So time will tell on that. Tari Eason continues to be in and out of the lineup with the lower leg soreness. It traces back to the stress reaction during the preseason. So Rockets don't anticipate a major absence there, but he will miss occasional games for maintenance, and he's limited to about 25 to 27 minutes when he does play, according to Ime Udoka. So rotation minutes, but not quite starters minutes, at least not yet for Tari Eason because of the stress reaction in his leg. So that is a potential hindrance. Should note that the schedule coming up for the Rockets is very difficult. It's good that they took care of business against the Nets and the Pistons, who are bad because, boy, this weekend's back-to-back against the Timberwolves and the Bucks. As of our recording time, those are 2 of the 3 best teams by record in the NBA. Then you've got a 6-game Eastern Conference road trip. It's about to be difficult. But by and large, since we last recorded, I went back and looked. It was December 20th with Stanford KP, Karthik Prasad, his real name, our NBA trade season preview. That was the Atlanta game. And it's interesting because I feel like that was probably the low point of the season for Alperen Sengun when he got destroyed in the pick and roll in the fourth quarter of that game. Didn't finish. We actually talked in our last couple of pods about Sengun perhaps hitting something of a fatigue wall after being leaned on so heavily early in the year, and the Rockets at times have referenced a stamina issue for him. Well, boy, has he found his second wind and then some. So lots new to discuss, and we'll get to that off the top because really, Sengun is the story of the last couple of weeks. You look since that recording, Rockets are 4-3 over their last 7 games. Plenty of ups and downs. I think right before Christmas, that win at New Orleans, a full-strength Pelicans team with Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, C.J. McCollum, so on and so forth, probably the most impressive win of the entire year. Night 2 of a tough back-to-back. Sengun with a career-high 37 points. Just a fantastic performance, taking over down the stretch against a very good team on the road. I would argue it's their most encouraging win of the entire season. Then, of course, you lost the 3 games at home right after Christmas to the Pacers, Suns, and Sixers. That's also when you lost Dillon to the oblique strain, which definitely has not helped the defense. And particularly in those games, those quick guards like Tyrese Halliburton and Tyrese Maxey picked you apart, and not having your best point of attack defender in Dillon definitely played a role in that, in my opinion. Even so, again, I think it's worth noting that those losses, while they are L's on paper, and ultimately your win-loss record is what matters, especially for a team that is capable of making a playoff push, and it's clear now that that goal is realistic. When you look under the hood, it's not like they played terribly. Especially the Indiana and Philly games, they had late leads in the last 2 or 3 minutes. They just slipped away late when 2 brilliant playmakers, Tyrese Halliburton and Tyrese Maxey, just made 1 or 2 more plays, especially against a Rockets team without Dillon Brooks. It's understandable because you don't really have any other great point of attack defenders. I would also argue that the Indiana game was a really bad shot luck game, in my opinion. I think Indiana had 19 threes, Rockets had only 5. I think most nights Houston wins that game with a normal shot luck variance. With that said, you can throw out all the caveats, all the explanations in the world, and it only can sort of tide you over for a limited period of time. At some point, you've got to get back to winning, and on paper, as the 7-game homestand continued this week against the Pistons and the Nets, was a prime opportunity to get back to winning, and the Rockets did that, and they did it in style, winning both by double digits. Of course, on paper, the Rockets are better than both of those teams. They went out and showed why, and now you're back to multiple games over 500 entering this very tough scheduling stretch. So it's very, very good news that the Rockets banked those easy wins while they still could. So as far as the storylines from those games and what to watch for in the coming days, we'll be talking about that throughout today's pod. Certainly, we want to discuss Thompson and Cam Whitmore starting to break out because, honestly, there's a lot of juicy implications there. There's also been a slight uptick in recent games from Jalen Green, although, of course, there's plenty of inconsistency in there, which has been the theme throughout his entire season, not just from game to game, but oftentimes from quarter to quarter and half to half. But to lead off, as we said earlier, we've got to start with Alperen Sengun. The NBA just put out its first All-Star fan voting update on Thursday, and he currently ranks 7th among front court players in the West. It's an outstanding spot, and in my opinion, it's fully deserved. Now, let's start by acknowledging that as good as Alp is, he's not going to start the All-Star game this year, barring injury withdrawals. At that point, he'd be put into the game by the coaches in consultation with the league office. When you look at the front court in the Western Conference, Nikola Jokic, best player in the modern NBA, and then LeBron James and Kevin Durant, global brands who are still producing at an elite level into their mid to late 30s. They're clearly better players. They're much bigger names, and they're, to no surprise, the top 3 in the fan voting. They are going to be your 3 front court players. It is what it is. They're, besides being bigger brands, they're also better players, and there's no disrespect to Alp in acknowledging that. And then the next 3, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Anthony Davis, those are all future Hall of Famers, just like the first 3, and 4 of them play in the mega market of Los Angeles. There's no shame in trailing those guys in votes. Again, you've got the 2 Lakers guys, LeBron and AD. You've got the 2 Clippers guys, Kawhi and Paul George. And then you've got Nikola Jokic and Kevin Durant. There's no shame in trailing to any of those 6, all future Hall of Famers, and 4 of the 6 in a massive market. But to lead everybody else, including freaking Wemby, who's more than 100,000 votes behind Sengun in the 8th spot, that's pretty remarkable. And it speaks not just to the intensity of Rockets fans, but also people around the world taking notice of what Alp is doing. The actual path for Sengun to make the team is going to be as a reserve. And that's going to be decided later this month in balloting from each NBA coaching staff. But I do think he has a real chance. The numbers obviously are fantastic. He's currently averaging over 20 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 assists per game, true shooting percentage over 60. And as long as the Rockets keep overachieving, I've said in the past, I've referenced it a few minutes ago on today's show, as long as they're staying at or above 500, I think that is massive for the sake of the narrative to make sure that people really take notice of what's happening with this team. If that's the case, there's going to be a push to recognize this drastic turnaround on the NBA's biggest stage. And if there is, it obviously should start with the team's clear best player, which is Sengun. And if anything, the good news is that his all-star case is literally growing by the game. When we last recorded, again, around December 20th, that was when he was in his mini slump. That was the day he was targeted defensively by Atlanta in the pick and roll. He didn't finish that game. He was struggling offensively to finish at the rim the way he normally does. And again, we were worried that he was hitting something of a fatigue wall after he was leaned on so heavily to start the year. But even if that was the case, he certainly caught his second wind and then some over the last couple weeks. In his last 10 games, Sengun is averaging more than 25 points per game on better than 65% true shooting, just phenomenal efficiency. And as far as his realistic path to the All-Star game, just listen to the comments from opposing coaches, which is who will actually be deciding it. On Monday, Monty Williams of the Pistons said Sengun was maybe the best post-up guy in the entire NBA, right up there with Jokic and Joel Embiid. On Wednesday, Jacques Vaughn of the Nets basically said that you can't not double team Sengun because it's just too easy for him to score if you don't. And while they did have a little success doubling on the low block in the first half and they forced a lot of turnovers, Ime Udoka made the adjustment of moving Sengun closer to the elbow in the second half. And Vaughn said post-game that made those double teams a lot more difficult to pull off. We saw Nick Nurse and the Sixers try a similar strategy last week, and Sengun still had a monster night. For me, that Brooklyn game, which as we're recording is the most recent, it was just so fulfilling on a number of fronts. Yeah, the rookies broke out. We'll get to that. Yeah, the Nets have now lost 10 of 12 games and they're 15-20, which means Brooklyn could be sending the Rockets a top 10 draft pick as part of the James Harden deal from a few years ago. That's looking like a real win for Rafael Stone, GM of the Rockets, and we'll get to that as well. But the reason this game really stood out to me, it was the quintessential matchup where one team had a him and the other didn't. The Nets have lots of nice professional players, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Nick Claxton, those types of guys. And I thought they generally played hard. But what they don't have is a straw that stirs the drink. They don't have a guy that can be transcendent and lift the team. The Rockets increasingly do with Sengun. And it just felt like to me, especially after that chippy sequence with Claxton where Sengun was given the dead ball technical late in the first half, it just felt like Sengun put his fingerprints all over that game and said, I'm not going to let us lose this. And he didn't. Obviously, Ime deserves some credit as well for putting Sengun more at the elbows, as Vaughn alluded to in his post-game comments. But ultimately, it's all P making the plays. For longtime Rockets fans, the Nets actually remind me, and I said this on Twitter after the game, of those weird Rockets years from 2010 through 2012, post Yao Ming, but just before James Harden. That was when they were going 41-41, 42 and 40, something like that, nearly every year. There were lots of nice players on those rosters. They competed and played hard, but every time they went up against a player that had, or a team, that had a legit all-star level player or two, it just felt like that team could get to a level the Rockets just couldn't reach, even if they were playing hard and professional. That to me is sort of what it felt like watching the Rockets with Sengun versus the Nets. Houston has one of those guys, which is a pretty amazing feeling. I'd say he's already a top 25, at worst a top 30 NBA player, and he's just 21 years old and literally improving by the day. But I actually want to look at this through a slightly different lens, because I think Paolo and I will both agree that Sengun deserves all-star honors. Let's just be honest. We're homers. We desperately want LP and the organization to get that reward, to be on the biggest stage. To me, that's a boring discussion. Of course we think LP is an all-star. What I think is a more interesting discussion to have on our Rockets podcast, and this is where I want to get Paolo's input, are we at the point now where we're comfortable giving LP a max deal, both in money and in years, this offseason? Because I think increasingly I am. Now, for clarity, when I say comfortable, I don't mean giving him a blank check literally on day one of the offseason, which is when he's eligible for an extension after having played 3 NBA years. If Rafael Stone can negotiate him down to a more manageable figure, or if LP is willing to go the Tom Brady route and take a bit less money to help put the best team around him, then great. The Rockets do have a lot of mouths that they've got to feed financially over the coming years when we talk about this core 6 of prospects and building a team beyond them as well. But I do think the calculus is very different with LP than it is with Jalen Green, your other extension eligible guy this summer, as we've discussed in recent pods. With Jalen, if he doesn't get more consistent, there's not a ton of harm, I should say, in simply playing out his existing deal and taking him into restricted free agency after year 4. You do have matching rights, and in many cases, teams get friendlier deals by taking a guy like that into restricted free agency because other teams don't really want to waste their time bidding if they think you're going to match anyway. The bottom line with Jalen, unless there's a sustained uptick in his form, you probably can and should be patient and gather more data. Jalen and his reps should certainly understand why. But with Sengun, once you acknowledge as an organization that he actually is a legit star, not a potential one, but someone whose production already warrants that status, in my opinion, you've got to prioritize that relationship. Make him the face of the franchise, which we're already starting to see the team do in recent days with the individual all-star push. Just generally speaking, make it clear that you see a long-term vision with LP as a centerpiece. Because if there's one thing the modern NBA has taught us about star players, it's that nurturing those relationships is everything. Even if they're under contract for several years, you got to keep them bought in and happy because they have all the power. They're that rare. They're that important. And with LP, of course, he'd prefer the financial and also the emotional security that comes from getting that first big contract this summer. Now, in theory, could you wait until he's restricted in 2025 and maybe leverage your way into a slightly better deal financially? Maybe. But if we acknowledge that he really is this damn good, I'm not sure the risk is worth the reward. In my opinion, do what it takes to make him happy. Don't string him along for over a year. Now, again, that does not mean blank check day one. You can try to negotiate, and maybe he'll give you a slight bargain if you give him that security earlier than you have to. But if push comes to shove, even if it ultimately takes the max, I say you get it done before next season. Assuming there's not some drastic downturn in his play, I'm sold. And another point of clarity, when I say centerpiece, I'm saying a centerpiece, not the centerpiece. Certainly the hope is that other members of your young core, if not Jalen, then maybe Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, even Amin or Cam, the hope is that one or more of those guys can join Sengun in that elite tier somewhere down the road. I'm not foreclosing that possibility at all. We're just not there yet. The last point I want to make before we hand this off to Paolo, beyond the numbers and the talent, I could not be more impressed by Sengun's mental makeup. And that is a big consideration when you're talking about giving someone his first big NBA contract. Teams really have to consider, is that player's focus going to wane if they're no longer as financially motivated? To me, LP checks all the boxes. We heard Fred VanVleet call him a superstar in the making the other night in his post-game interview, and that's not a phrase a veteran like Fred tosses around lightly. Also in that same interview, he called LP a workhorse, which he has been. In the past, you had to worry about his stamina, or at least the Rockets thought they did. Now he's playing 32 minutes per game on super high usage, and there's zero injury or durability concerns. The work he put in with his body this offseason, just phenomenal. In terms of his game, he's moving better than ever. He's stronger. He's better defensively. And that's a testament to his work. We saw the Nets in the last game try to target him on switches and mismatches. It wasn't working. Even if LP isn't a rim-protecting shot blocker, he's still so smart and he's got such quick hands that he forces turnovers inside. He still is a difference maker on that end of the floor. And then, as we've discussed, he does hold his own on a lot of these switches. And then on offense, Look at the mid-range game and all those crafty fadeaways off one leg. Look at how that has exploded for him just in 1 year. It's taken him to the next level as a scorer, just as Jacques Vaughn said, and it's made it to where you basically can't not double team him. He put that in his bag in one offseason. He said post-game to Brian Bearfield, Big Sarge Sports, that was something he worked on every day in last offseason, and it just went from something he almost never utilized to something that's a major tool in his toolbox. Again, that speaks to not just the talent, but the work ethic and the mental makeup. To me, he is a star in every sense of the word, and that's the type of guy you can feel confident is still going to put in the work, even after he gets paid. To me, it also helps that he's so close with Fred, who happens to be a perfect example of a veteran player and a mentor who is clearly still putting in the work, even after he got that big contract from the Rockets last offseason. So with all that in mind, I think I'm sold on Alperen Sengun as a max player. Now, keep in mind, the max for a young player is not the same as it is for Fred. It's scaled down relative to service time. So when we say max, we're not talking about a starting annual salary of 40-something million the way it was for Fred a few months ago. We're talking about the max coming off his initial NBA contract, which is obviously a bit lower. But within that context, yeah, I do think Alp should be treated as one of those guys, assuming this level of play or something close to it continues the rest of this season. Now, would I love to get him for cheaper? Sure, and it's certainly worth trying. But to me, Alp is showing enough to where you find a way to get that deal done this offseason. You give him that peace of mind. You make it clear that he's a long-term piece. And if it ultimately takes the max, then it takes the max. Paolo, are you at a similar place when it comes to Sengun and the calculus on where things go from here?
I was actually going to say that I disagree with you harder than I actually am. I think you made some good points about maybe it's time to start thinking like an actual superstar and start thinking about relationships. So far in the rebuild, right, the team has so much power because of rookie contracts that unless we're talking about a Ja Morant situation, you don't really care too much about you don't want to call out players too early. But I mean, it is true that Sengun is getting to that stage. I'm not sure he's there yet, right? But he's getting to that stage, and that makes it interesting as far as if you wanna max him this offseason already. I think I'm kind of done micro-analyzing. I know it's our job to, as analysts are talking on the podcast, to talk week to week about the progression of the team, about the progression of the players, about certain trends that come and go. But the thing with Sengun that I think it's hard. We thought he was hitting a wall because of fatigue, and then all of a sudden, hey, the schedule has been as dense as it's ever been, and he has come out swinging out of it. So it wasn't fatigue, and I think at some point we have to just accept that a lot of the inconsistencies are just due to the fact that these guys are 21-year-old and younger.
Yeah.
And listen, he's gonna and even superstars have weeks off. If it's a superstar, usually not more than a week, but I mean, the 21-year-old playing like a superstar is obviously going to have those down moments as well. I guess it's just more exacerbated because he's by far and away the best player on the team, and the team just plays like shit when he's not playing well. So at least offensively. So that's my first point about the reaction to, first the little slump that he had and now how he's playing again. If this were fatigue, it would compound and get worse until the All-Star break. I don't think there's a rational argument to say it was fatigue anymore. So I guess we can throw that out of the window. The other thing that I would mention, as far as maxing him or not, I mean, I can see the upside with maxing him now and, fostering that relationship. For reference, current estimates say that a max for Sengun would be, if it's signed this season, if I'm not mistaken, would be a deal starting at 38 million, going on to 41, 44, 46, the usual 8% increments on the base salary. I think those are the numbers that are currently being voted according to the cap projections.
Yeah, I guess I should say it's not similar to Fred in terms of percentage of the cap, because the raw number at the rate at which salaries and payrolls are exploding, the raw number actually might not be too dissimilar. But in terms of percentage of the cap, yeah, he would be at a lower figure. That's a more accurate way to put it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to go on to next. Considering what the cap is, unless he makes an all NBA team, he's going to get 25% of the max. If he makes an all NBA team, I think he's eligible for the supermax. But usually, without the supermax, 6 years or less, you get 25% from 7 to 9 years of playing in the league of experience. You get 30 and 10 plus years, you get 35, and these are the deals that Lillard signs and those guys that are still superstars at that age get as extensions. The deal that we were talking about Harden signing when he was here, the 2-year extension that he ended up not taking. So it is 10% less than what you usually consider a max nowadays. Regardless of what the number is, I can give you the example. The difference would be between 38 and 54 million, basically, by the time the contract would start, which is, a lot of money. It's more than the MLE. So yeah, from that perspective, I think the Rockets, even though I can see the value in fostering the relationship with Sengun, I think the Rockets at the same time have to get something in return for extending him a year early, basically guaranteeing him the money a year early, because that is a lot of money and that is a lot of upside for Sengun in signing the deal early. So the way I would negotiate it if I were Stone, I would say you can have the max deal. Well, first of all, I'll try to make it flat, right? Make the same, make it be the same money across all 5 years, but that's leaving a lot of money on the table because of the 8% raises. So I don't think you would take that. However, what I think a fair compromise would be, considering this is even though he's always looked good but underutilized, this is Sengun's first year looking like a superstar, right? If there is still risk that it's a fluke, it happens sometimes. Even though the risk is small, the risk's there. So I think a fair way to settle it is you sign a max extension, but you don't make it a max extension. What do I mean by this? A max extension on a player that's on his third year on his rookie deal is you sign the contract as a max, and it's a provisional figure until the actual cap projections kick in, and which means the figure can change if Sengun makes an All-NBA team in the 4th year. It happened, I think, with Bam Adebayo or Jason Tatum. I'm not sure which one, but the deal they signed it for a max, and it's a provisional figure until the deal actually kicks in, right? Because he's signing an extension on year 3 that only kicks in after year 4.
Right.
And so what usually happens is you sign it as a max, as a 25% max, as a percentage of the cap, and then the contract is calculated at the time that it kicks in.
Right.
So the contract can increase if the salary cap has a massive jump, which I think the NBA has accounted for in the new CBA, or if the player makes an All-NBA team. I think those are called escalators, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sorry if this is not the correct terminology.
Right. Pretty sure that's right.
And so I'd be willing to sign him to the max if you don't include the escalators in. Which means that's the upside for the Rockets is you were guaranteeing you the money right now.
You're locking in the money without the potential for it going even higher.
Exactly. Like you get the money right now. Yeah, exactly. You get the certainty of $205 million right now. In exchange, in case you make an All-NBA team next year, you don't get it to jump from that max to a supermax. That's basically the difference, I think. I think this is how it would work. I could stand corrected if anybody knows better than me. But I think it's how it works, and that is what I would settle at. Because at that point, a supermax contract, as much as it is a tool for teams to retain players, a supermax contract is a massive shot in the foot when building a team. It's no secret that when supermax contracts kick in all across the league, they make players untradeable. They make teams extremely hard to build around because 35% is a massive number. And we still aren't sure. The worst position you can be in is when you supermax a player because he had one season as an All-NBA guy, but he's not a superstar player. It's not a top 10, a top 5 player, which is what the supermax is meant to do. And so you're paying top 10 player money to a top 20 player. And at that point, that's when you start having a lot of trouble building your team around them. And that's what I would like the Rockets to try and avoid going into it. Now, if Sengun has earned a max contract by the standard of what a normal rookie max contract is, I think he has. And so if that's a compromise that they're willing to do, that's what I would sit at. And
Yeah.
actually, go ahead.
Go ahead.
You can go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think that's absolutely a fair compromise, and I think that's probably something they would shoot for. I guess when I say I would give him the max, I mean that if push comes to shove, if this level of play continues, and that's a big if, then by October 15th or whatever the deadline is next fall, I might cave. Not a given, but I'm saying if this level of play, and that's a big if, because as longtime listeners may recall, I was thinking about this when I was going through this outline today. About a year ago, both of us were open to giving James Harden a 4-year max potentially. Remember that?
If you say so, I'm not sure we were as. Do we go as far as a 4-year max?
We said we were open to it. We didn't say
All
for
right.
sure we would do it. We said it would not be a total deal breaker in an abstract sense. However, by May and June, when the decision actually had to be made, we did back off that, because what ended up happening at this time a year ago, Harden was actually a top 10 player. He was just ridiculous by all the advanced metrics. But what happened, and this is pretty standard for a guy who's 33 years old, about to turn 34 at the time, he got hurt. His performances became a lot more inconsistent to finish the regular season and then in the playoffs. And we revisited that opinion and said, you know what, that's a little too risky. So by the time we actually had to decide, we went back on what we initially said when these Harden talks really heated up, starting around Christmas last year and then leading into January and February. There were shows where we said even if he demanded a 4-year max, it wasn't a total no-go. But we eventually came around, and the Rockets came to this position as well, that it was just a little bit too risky to go down that path with what was and is now a 34-year-old James Harden. And while I don't expect Sengun to necessarily have an age-related decline at 21 years old, not saying the dynamic is identical, but where it is similar is from the standpoint of sample size. And you've raised that a few times. We're not even to the halfway point of this season. If it falls off, if he gets exposed more in the play-in tournament or the playoffs based on, some of the pick and roll limitations, think the Atlanta game from a couple of weeks ago, then yeah, we can absolutely revisit these takes. It's just, for me, based on the totality of the evidence, when you look at his season-long numbers and the trend line, the fact that his last 10 games are the best yet, should this continue, and that's a big caveat, then yeah, I may be to a point this offseason where you try for the compromises, and I agree that giving you protection against the supermax should he make an all-NBA team a year from now, because, after Jokic and Embiid, really, there's theoretically a path. It's not a given. It's not like you have to have a center, but there's definitely a plausible path. It's not impossible. I would try for that compromise. However, if this continues, or if he continues to get even better, which has been the trend line of late, you could talk me into it. So,
but the thing is, right? Why would you do that if he hits restricted free agency? You're still by far and away the team that can offer him the most, right? He doesn't even have the leverage of, somebody else will max me. Well, shit, we can max you for the next 3 year, and our max is bigger than, besides in year one. Year one's the same, but our raises are bigger than what any other team can offer you. And so even if, and we all know that no team's ever going to compromise, 38 million in space to give an offer sheet to Sengun, knowing that if push comes to shove, the Rockets will match anyways.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know, it's just that restricted free agency is so lopsided for the team that I think extensions happen way more than I thought that they would in the NBA recently, because of how lopsided it is. And usually, if it's a super max extension, what guys are looking at the guys that are getting it, not a super max extension. If it's a max extension, when we look at the guys that are getting it, I guess you would be right in the sense that I think Jaren Jackson Jr., who I would argue is not more impactful than Sengun at the moment, did get as a max extension before his rookie season. No, he did not. Okay, he did not. I was trying to think of examples of players that got max extensions while not being, this guy's obviously a star, like Jason Tatum, like Ja Morant, like guys like that. And actually, I thought Jaren Jackson Jr. was an example of this, but actually he wasn't. He got a below max extension. So there may be, I may be forgetting some guys, but usually the guys that get that extension are like have been the real deal. Yeah.
Well, let me interject because you've actually sold me. I will concede this point to you because when I was going through this thought exercise and looking at percentage of the cap, I was not thinking of the potential supermax. I was thinking in terms of after this season, because there's no real way he's going to be an all NBA, even third team guy this year. That's getting a little carried away. So I was thinking of the lower max. I was not thinking of it in terms of what if he hits at literally a top 15 in the league, which is what an all NBA team first, second, or third means, between him being a little too young, the narrative not quite being there yet, and the fact that he's still developing, the obvious inconsistency with a 21-year-old. When I went through this thought exercise, I was not even thinking of it as a possibility because even the biggest Alperen Sengun optimist, I don't think considers all NBA a possibility for him this season. He's just not there yet. But yeah, to your point of this extreme scenario where what if he hits it next year and you tie it to, the exact percentage of the cap in terms of the escalators, then yeah, that's too risky from an organizational perspective based on the fact that, career years do happen. So I would agree with you. For clarity, my willingness to give him the max was under the non-supermax criteria.
Yeah, and this isn't a dig at Sengun either. Like, I know people will probably listen to this and they'll say, oh, there goes Paulo again discrediting Sengun. No, I am making this point because I think it's very plausible that he'll make an All-NBA third team next year and be supermax eligible. So this is me giving him credit, not the opposite. And I'm a team fan. I hope Sengun does well enough. He makes enough money to do so. But I would rather have him on a team friendlier deal for team building, regardless of how good he is. And I feel that way with every single player that we've ever signed. I'm not one of those guys that
it's about building a championship team. It's not about an individual.
Yeah, I'm not one of those guys on Twitter that look at, I don't know, Jordan Poole or Kyle Kuzma getting massive extensions and goes, oh, good for them. No, if that were my team, I'd be pissed. So, yeah.
No, the fact that we're even talking about Alperen Sengun as potentially supermax eligible is fascinating in and of itself. Just imagine if someone had said that 3 months ago. But that's where we are. I mean, I didn't even think about it going through the thought exercise. But yeah, now that I'm thinking about the actual mechanisms, you can't rule it out that after Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid, it's not like there's clear center types. And I know there doesn't have to be three centers, but oftentimes voters do look at these teams and sort of orient them like a team. And so there is potentially a path, not a given. But yeah, I would agree. If Sengun wants that level of security a year before the organization would have to give it, then he should have to give something back. There's no reason for the Rockets to go to that extreme length a year early. But I think if he would take that out of play, tying it to the All-NBA team, the potential supermax, and just go to the normal max, that is potentially reasonable, assuming this level of play continues, right?
Yeah, it's just absolutely insane. This is even a consideration, but that's the upside that LP has. And especially after Jokic paved the way towards
Yep.
that archetype being accepted, right?
It's still new. Yeah.
It, who knows how people would have looked at, I don't know, Nikola Vucevic if he were a prospect nowadays.
Right.
So it's totally plausible, and we know all NBA teams are media voted and player and I think staff voted awards. So it's totally possible that the narrative has changed. You don't need to be Hakeem Olajuwon, Joel Embiid type to be an All NBA center anymore, and Sengun has the raw production to potentially make that if he keeps it consistent another year or probably improves on it. So it's
Yeah.
it's definitely a concern you got to take into consideration.
Absolutely. All right, let's transition our discussion to more short-term considerations because in terms of all NBA, that's months or years away. We're talking about considerations this offseason and perhaps as late as June and July of 2025. In the near term, what's on the agenda is the All-Star push for Alperen Sengun. And for clarity, because I have seen some on Twitter misunderstand this very point, the All-Star game is not tied to these contractual factors. The All-NBA teams voted on at the end of the year, again, the top 15, those are what is tied to the contractual factors and a hypothetical supermax that's up to 35% of the cap. The All-Star game is, well, I mean, it's a vanity project, but it's a valuable vanity project. It's getting the player and the team on the biggest stage, and the Rockets have not had someone of that stature, no one even in the conversation since James Harden. So it's phenomenal that we're here, that he's seventh in fan voting. Although, as referenced earlier, the path for him to get on the team is as a reserve. And so I think, assuming this level of play continues, that's the assumption that underpins so much of what we're saying on this pod. But assuming that it does, then not only does he have a case, in my opinion, he should be on that team. And so the question is how you get the coaches to respect that. And I think, the good news is that when you see comments like what I was reading off earlier from Monty Williams and Jacques Vaughn, and you look at the way Nick Nurse, one of the best tacticians in the NBA, was going to all sorts of creative lengths to deal with Sengun in that Philly game, it does feel like that Sengun is being noticed in the film room by other coaches as the kind of guy that beyond just individual numbers, look how important he is in a team construct to what the Rockets are trying to do. And ultimately, it's successful for the Rockets. That's where the team record being at or above 500 means a lot for the sake of that narrative. Beyond that, though, there's an interesting angle as far as how the Rockets can potentially help Sengun along in this process. And who knows? I mean, I guess there could be potentially some semblance of a link between the All-Star game and eventually, contractual factors, negotiating power, because at a bare minimum, it does put Sengun on. It gives him a bigger platform. It puts him on a bigger stage. It's one more thing that his agency can use in negotiating talks, and perhaps seeing Sengun on that stage makes it more likely down the road that someone could vote him to an All-NBA team. I think that even though it's not directly connected, you could certainly argue that there's a correlation there. I think that's fair. But in terms of the Rockets actually making it happen, which for now is mostly vanity, but it's valuable vanity. It's valuable exposure both individually and at a team level. There's been some pushback in recent days that I've seen on social media. And first things first, I want to say that I completely understand where it comes from. The pushback I'm referring to is that every time the Rockets, and a lot of teams do this, put a team graphic out suggesting that fans should vote for, in the Rockets case, it's four players. It's Sengun, it's Fred, it's Dylan Brooks, and it's Jalen Green. And obviously, Sengun is far better, far more valuable than Dylan and Jalen. Now, you could argue that Fred is in the same class, but certainly he's had a lot more value this season than Dylan and especially Jalen. You could argue, by the way, that Jabari Smith and Tari Eason have had more valuable seasons than Jalen, but I'm told the Rockets are focusing more on the rising stars game for them. That's the more realistic path. And so their all-star push, it's at a team-wide level for guys who are, beyond their first couple of years and thus veterans that are more likely to get that type of honor. And the sensitivity angle, it all goes back to the fact that in the past, whether you want to pin it on Stephen Silas or Phil Stone, both, there have been times that the Rockets undervalued Sengun the last couple of years, his first two in the NBA, even in the media, the superfan community, the blogs, people like myself and Paolo. We've undervalued Sengun at times. So for the diehard Sengun supporters, whenever there's anything that's not 100% pro Sengun, it can be triggering. I see it and I understand why it is, because in the past, he has legitimately been undervalued or underappreciated. And we've seen this dynamic play out in recent days where when the Rockets put out a graphic suggesting that fans vote for multiple players, the response is, why is Sengun being looked at as one of a number of guys? Why is he not the face of the franchise? In this particular case, while I understand where that sensitivity comes from and it's warranted, the Rockets sort of did this to themselves, I do think in this particular case, it's being overdone. There's a couple of angles here, and this one is less important. But first off, remember that when the All-Star voting opened, I believe it was on or around December 20th, that date we've referenced a couple of times, our last podcast, the Atlanta game where Sengun got torched in the fourth quarter. That was actually when Sengun was going through his mini slump. So at the time, it was a bit harder to make the individual case for Alperen Sengun when it comes to the Rockets and their marketing channels, be it social media, emails, the broadcast network on TV, and so on and so forth. At the time, it was a little bit harder than it is now. It's really been the last 7 to 10 days that if you look at the Rockets on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, whatever your platform of choice is, you have seen the Rockets focus more on Sengun individually. And I think some people believe it's in response to this fan backlash. Actually, it's in response to Sengun's play going to another level, the way we've been describing. He's been absolutely incredible, especially this last week. And so when you have more to sell, when you have more to push, it's the job of the Rockets social media to push that. And in my opinion, that's what the social media team, that's what marketing is doing. The bigger factor, though, beyond timing, is that in terms of how Sengun actually gets to the All-Star game, again, it's not going to be through the fan voting. It's going to be through ballots from coaching staffs. That's how the reserves are selected. Fan voting has nothing to do with that. So in terms of the coaches' ballots, number one, that voting period is not open yet. And secondly, coaches are not going to be just randomly scrolling social media. The way that promotion is done is direct to the voter from team to team. The way it works, the Rockets will put together a promotion package for Sengun. I'm told they're already working on it, and they're going to submit that to other teams the same way that other teams will put together promotional packages from some of their guys and send it to the Rockets. And the Rockets will make sure it's played in front of Ime Udoka and his staff when they're considering who to put on their ballot, and other teams will do the same for the Rockets. But that's how the marketing works for all-star honors at a reserve level. And I'm sure some will point out, well, what's the harm in pushing it, even if he's not going to get in, he's not going to pass Jokic, LeBron, or KD for one of the 3 front court spots in the fan voted portion, then what's the harm in doing it? I mean, there's no harm, and you are seeing the Rockets increasingly do it, but at some point, there is such a thing as resources and allocation, and it's just like in a game. The Rockets typically show probably 10 highlights. If you look at their Twitter or Instagram feed in a given game, it may be 15 if they win, 5 if they lose. You can always argue, why not 15 rather than 10? At some point, there's only so much time in the day. There's only so many resources that you have. And it's better spent your time and your energy, that is, on being practical, on what's going to make the most impact. And in this case, what's going to make the most impact in terms of actually getting Sengun to that game is focusing on your creative campaign. The Rockets have done this in the past. If you read media articles, you can Google this. Rockets pitch James Harden MVP to voters. You can see what the Rockets put together in the mid to late 2010s every single year to media voters who were deciding where James would rank on their MVP ballot every year. I think they're going to do something similar, although targeting a bit more towards coaches and what they look for in their marketing outreach leading up to the All-Star Game selections later this month. At some point, you do need to be practical. And I think that's what the Rockets are looking at this through. It's not that you'll never see them promote him individually on social media. Again, they've started doing it more in large part because his play has warranted it. But the bigger picture, I think they're focused on how do I campaign to who's actually going to be making this decision. NBA coaches are not going to be idly scrolling social media and listening to what Joe Sixpack 69 suggests and saying, wow, that's really nice. That's who I should vote to the All-Star game. No, it's a lot more layered. It's a lot more nuanced than that. And the Rockets know how this game is played. That's why you pay lots of money to marketing and PR people. And trust me when I say they are taking this seriously. And the last thing I'll say on this subject, please keep in mind that while the sensitivity is warranted, the people that are running these marketing campaigns and the admins behind the social media account, that's not Steven Silas. That's not Rafael Stone. That's not Tillman Fertitta. They don't work for them. They don't interact with those people very frequently, if at all. They have different bosses. For the most part, these are fans of the team, just like you and me. They want nothing but the best for the Houston Rockets. They are thrilled with this season, and they would love nothing more than for Alperen Sengun to get what he deserves, which is a spot in the All-Star game. So just please keep in mind, I've seen some of the backlash to the Rockets post on social media the last few days. Please keep in mind that the person you're talking to there, don't look at it, even if you do have misgivings. And again, I understand where those come from. Don't make it personal towards them. Trust me when I say that they love Alp. He is adored inside the building at Toyota Center, and they want nothing but the best for him and this team. They care about it every bit as much as we do, and then some. So I would just say keep it professional. Please remember that the person you're interacting with on social media is not who you may have or had a misgiving with when it comes to basketball operations decisions and minutes and certain priorities the last couple of years. Those are two different things. So number one, be fair to them. But then also just in terms of the organization as a whole, I do think they get it now with Sengun. You're seeing both in terms of the playing style and off the court, them lean into Sengun as the face of the team, the face of the franchise more and more. But beyond that, just please keep in mind how the voting is actually conducted. He is not going to be a starter. It's not realistic. Everybody knows that. The realistic path is with the coaches. And so the Rockets are tailoring the majority of their marketing outreach and their focus for getting Sengun to the team in a way that's going to be best received by those coaches. So again, I'm not trying to say that the backlash is unwarranted. I understand exactly where it comes from because there's times the last couple of years that the Rockets themselves and people around the team, including me and you, Paolo, we've undervalued Sengun. So I get it. I'm not going to tell anybody that they shouldn't be concerned about it. And in fact, if you want to sort of stay on top of the team and tell them, hey, you better, have the right campaign for all P when these decisions get made by the coaches later this month. Okay, I get it. And, to an extent, you should probably make the campaign to media members as well, because I'm sure coaches, they're not going to follow Twitter, but they probably will watch Inside the NBA and some of the national shows as they talk about who should and shouldn't be on the All-Star team. So I'm sure that'll be a part of the outreach as well, even if media members aren't the actual people making the final decision on this. But I just think that while certainly you can hold their feet to the fire, you can say that unlike in the past, you better prioritize him now. You should push him. All of that is completely fair. All I'm saying is that, in my opinion, there shouldn't be a 10-alarm fire based on what they have or haven't done to this point. Because, again, a lot of this is going to play out behind the scenes. And a lot of it, the actual voting window for how this can actually happen, it's not even here yet. So I would say that while I understand the angst, I understand the anxiety, and, I want the best for Sengun. I want him on the All-Star team as much as anybody. I do think some elements of the last few days have been sort of making a mountain out of a molehill and elevating things to the level of a 10-alarm fire when they're not really there yet at all. Not saying it can't get to that level. If they don't deliver later this month and Sengun doesn't make it, then sure, it's fair to question. That's absolutely reasonable, especially in the context of the last couple of years. Again, I get it. I just think some people are jumping the gun a little bit Paulo, is there anything you want to add on that front before we, shift the pod away from Sengun and towards the rookies?
Yeah, people need something to be mad at all times.
Yeah.
So right now that's Jalen. Things are going too well, so we can't ask for the GM to be fired. So I guess we should fire the GM because social media do not post what we want. Is my take on that.
Well, you're a lot more blunt as usual than I am. I'm trying to give people the benefit of the doubt, but social media is a virtual punching bag, and there's a lot of people, unfortunately, that because of their desire to lash out, turn things into, again, 10 alarm fires much more than they actually need to, or much more than are warranted, I should say. Anyway, let's try to wind this down. And for the back half of this, I want to talk about the improved play by the rookies, because Thompson, Cam Whitmore, both in double figures, both shot the ball well from three. Also, the length, athleticism, that made a clear impact on defense, even though they're rookies. And you typically think of rookies as not being impactful defensively because their processing is a little bit slow. Not sure that's actually going to be the case this year. I think with their athleticism, and especially in this period with Dylan Brooks and Tari Eason out, then that's something the Rockets as a team could really use. And I thought it proved useful against the Nets in terms of playing the passing lanes, getting some long rebounds, and just overall being a much more athletic team, which is particularly important when you don't have an athletic shot blocking, rim protecting center that's not Sengun's archetype. And even if they do trade for a backup center at the trade deadline, it's not like you're going to be trying to scale down Sengun's minutes. So for the most part, we're still going to be talking about a team that doesn't have that type of player out there. So how do you overcome that? More athleticism in other spots is key. So even though they're rookies, they can play a role, not just offensively with playmaking and scoring and shot creation. We've talked about that a lot, but certainly on the defensive end of the floor as well. And so to see Cam come in, stick those shots, Ime talked after the game about how he's seeing the game much better than he did earlier this year. That's where all the time in the G League really paid off. With Amen, it feels like he's slowed down, and sometimes I forgot who said it. Someone on Twitter said that sometimes his thinking gets ahead of his handle, and that's caused some of the turnovers at times this year. Now it seems like mentally he's slowed down as well, and so he's becoming much more lethal on the drives, getting to the cup, finishing through a little bit of contact, or sticking the mid-range shot. To me, his form, not just on three-pointers, certainly that sticks out, but even just pulling up in the 10 to 15-foot range. You can tell Ben Sullivan's put in a lot of work. Bottom line, those guys are proving worthy of minutes, and I think it has some interesting implications for, I would say, the midpoint of this year. Rockets are within 10 games of the halfway point, which will be at game 41. And then as you head to the back half of this season, Thompson and Cam Whitmore are worthy of more minutes. I think they can provide value in a lot of areas, but where do they come from? I've seen some people comparing and contrasting Cam and Jalen, which, there might be a few lineups where you use Cam as your shooting guard in place of Jalen, but for reasons we've discussed in the past, this is a huge year to gather data on Jalen Green. And for the most part, he has been better over the past week. There might be a few lineups here and there where you try Cam, but by and large, I don't think you're going to dramatically scale down Jalen Green's minutes. So in terms of where they actually come from, my guess is probably Aaron Holiday and Jae'Sean Tate. We've seen Aaron Holiday slip a little bit after that amazing start to the year. Jae'Sean Tate is a guy that, for reasons we've discussed in the past, I think could potentially be an intriguing sell candidate at the trade deadline, second to last year of a very team-friendly contract and plays a position where the Rockets do have a lot of alternatives. I could maybe see the Rockets moving on from Tate and that opening up more of a pathway to Amen into Cam. It's a little different from Amen because, the Rockets have tried to play Amen from the outset. It's just between injury and illness, he hasn't always been available, but he's certainly deserving of the minutes that he's got. And if anything, he may make a case for more minutes as his rookie year progresses. And with Cam, he basically hasn't been in the rotation except for the last week at times since the Rockets ran into these injuries with Dylan and Tari and briefly with Jabari with an ankle sprain. And so for guys that have played not a ton this year in terms of actual rotation minutes, with Amen, it's, again, due to injury and illness, but still the same, most of the rotation minutes he's not been out there, then you've got to think about how you find minutes on a team that's already very good and then, again, is about winning now. Even though they're the future, you don't want to dramatically, hurt your chances in the present with a team that's capable of the playoffs by forcing guys out there before they're ready. So the fact these guys are showing they are ready, it's interesting. And I think there's some fascinating implications that come from it. And I was really thinking about it after the Brooklyn game, because of course the Brooklyn game, as mentioned earlier, Nets have lost 10 of 12. They're 15 and 20. That's looking like a top 10 draft pick. And all of a sudden, you can get a decent contributor in the draft as well. I know it's sort of a weak draft, or it's supposed to be overall, but actually there are a number of high major college centers that are projected to go in like the 8 through 15 range. And so for a team in the Rockets that doesn't have a backup center, and it's not like they're trying to win a championship this year anyway, if you can't get a good deal, you can just wait and fill that hole with your Brooklyn pick in the draft, which as of now would be probably about 10th. And guys that have simplified roles, big men that have played at a high level in college, oftentimes those are guys that come in and, at least in a simplified role, can contribute immediately in the NBA. And the reason I bring that up in the context of Amin and Cam, well, first off, Amin and Cam excelled against Brooklyn, which also helps your draft pick. So it's beneficial on a number of fronts. But also, I think when you have guys that haven't even been in your rotation most of this year, that are knocking on the door and ready to play, it makes you less desperate to make a move leading up to the trade deadline. And then you also add in the fact that, hey, maybe this Brooklyn pick that, of course, is part of that James Harden trade, what a great deal that's looking like for Rafael Stone, then that's another factor that makes you be less willing to, say, give up a first-round draft pick for Clint Capella. When we had our trade season preview pod a couple of weeks ago with Stanford KP, that was one of your questions for both of us, which is, are you willing to give a first round pick? What would you have to get for that to be worthwhile? Not just in terms of the first round pick asset, but also the Stepien rule, how it sort of limits your options for future trades. And in my opinion, when I see Amin and Cam breaking out the way they are, and I get more bullish about the Brooklyn pick and what that might mean, not just as an asset, but just in terms of the player you may get in June if you just keep it and bring someone new into the organization, it makes me a lot more willing to stand pat and just look for maybe a smaller scale backup center at this year's deadline, with the idea that you can hold your chips for a bigger star down the line. Because at some point, even if it's not this deadline, we'll see if the Cavaliers are moved to consider a Donovan Mitchell trade. As of now, it's looking like maybe that's going to be off-season at the earliest. We'll see what happens. Again, probably not by the deadline, but by the off-season or middle of next season. The Zion situation in New Orleans is always worth monitoring. If you're comfortable with filling some of your short-term needs internally, and that's what Amin Thompson, Cam Whitmore, guys that aren't in your rotation now stepping up, makes you able to do. You're already needing to find playing time outside of your rotation for most of this year. And you have an ability to, beyond that, with the draft pick from Brooklyn, fill some of those minutes moving forward. Then to me, that allows you to be very selective with your approach to external trades. You shouldn't mortgage much of your war chest for marginal upgrades, for Clint Capella types. You can really stockpile your assets and save for a big name that comes available down the line, someone who really does move the needle. And it's tricky for the Rockets because while they have a good cupboard, it's not as stocked as obviously the Thunder. There's a couple other teams at the forefront of the list as well. So the Rockets, while if a player wants to be in Houston, we've talked about this in the past, that can sort of nudge you to the front of the line. It's just a matter of, do you have enough to make it worth the other team's while? I do think that you can think even more upside, even more true quality over quantity when you have such a clear path to filling needs internally. So with Amin and Cam knocking on the door for more minutes, with the Brooklyn pick potentially able to get you a decent contributor this summer, I think, it can help you in the short term in terms of filling, more playmaking, more scoring, more shot creation, more athleticism defensively. All of those things can help. But I also think long term, the implications are interesting because it allows you, in my opinion, to be a bit more patient, to think a bit more, again, quality over quantity, true top of the line. We know that's what wins in the NBA. So I'll turn this over to you, Paolo, because I know I've been a bit all over the map in terms of my sort of insight on what this breakout means. But for me, it's not just about the short term. Can they help you win games now? Yeah, and that's great. But I also think that there's some real implications in the medium to longer term as well that a surging Amen Thompson, Cam Whitmore, and now a surging Brooklyn pick in the draft order can do for Rafael Stone and the Rockets in the big picture. Where are you at on some of those dynamics?
Yeah, so as far as I guess I'll touch on I'll provide like smaller comments on all the topics. I think Amen's been impressive thus far. He kind of makes me think I'm starting to theorize that he may be a little bit like Jalen, where perhaps you don't need to give him a screen. What if you just space 5 out and let him drive? Is anybody going to be able to stop him? Because he's Jalen as far as speed goes, he's just bigger. So in the end, he's better at absorbing contact as he's shown. And then as far as the rest, we know he can hold his own defensively. We know he hustles. Offensively, we know that the shot's a work in progress and that still hasn't changed. It's just a matter of just letting him play. And I don't think anybody could have expected how bad he looked early on in the season to be sustainable. He still, efficiency-wise, scoring-wise, hasn't been that great. But you expect it to improve. As far as, and one more thing on Amen, and I think we've begun to see this more and more. You don't have to play him at the 1 if you want to find them minutes. You can play him at the 2, at the 3. You can make
Even
that
the 4.
work.
Yep.
Yeah. So his path to more minutes isn't really tied to giving Fred or Jalen or anybody else less minutes.
Yeah.
It's probably tied with.
It's also tied with the Tari Eason situation, which, by the way, the next 16 days, the Rockets have 3 back-to-backs coming up. So if you're trying to load manage Tari and give him some days off because of that stress reaction, I mean, we saw that in Wednesday's game against Brooklyn, where Amen was out there to sort of replace Tari's role on the defensive end as that long disruptor who can sort of pick up 94 feet at times.
Yeah, and so that's basically where I'm at with Amen. Just need Pete Bacon. He's coming off an injury. Ime talked about some potential conditioning issues. Talking about Cam, I think he's been crazy good. He's been kind of a little bit of what Alperen Sengun was when he came in. He's producing extremely well for the amount of minutes that he's given, but he's kind of got a glass ceiling because there's guys playing ahead of him that you can't really touch unless they get hurt, and now they're getting hurt. I mean, Dylan and Tari missing games. So I hope we are more aggressive in giving him more minutes. He brings something to this team that we don't really have, which is a very non-nonsense type of scoring. He can go through contact. He doesn't hesitate to shoot threes. He will draw fouls because of how not contact averse he is. So I think. Listen, I understand that you probably had to make some promises to Reggie Bullock in order to get him to sign here for the minimum instead of a contender. So you have to play him some. But I think, and I know the Rockets care a lot about free agent relationships. But man, listen, if Reggie says he's not playing enough and he asks to be waived, waive him. Cam Whitmore is more important. And Keishan Tate provides some stuff that is unique on this roster, especially his cutting instinct that helped Sengun a lot. But he is still, he's shooting 34% from 3 at this point, and it's going to continue to go down more likely than not. So I think you need to start prioritizing giving him minutes, especially because he's toned it down as far as the tunnel vision goes, or at the very least, he still shoots more than you'd expect out of a guy with the minutes that he's playing. But it's not like he's forcing stuff up, and he's been efficient. So you can tell anybody that they're shooting too much if they're having 63% true shooting.
Sure.
And I think you definitely count him in your plans moving on to next offseason and any potential trades that you might make. One of the easiest positions to fill in at trade deadlines are those 2, 3, 4 the wing positions because of how versatile they are, so of how many players become available at those positions. I wouldn't look into getting any of those guys unless we're talking about a transcendent superstar. As far as I want to touch a little bit on Jalen, I think I figured it out. We just been chalking it up to inconsistency as far as how he's playing and how he'll have random good games and completely random bad games. I think it's just so I think it has to do with two things. First of all, he needs to be playing at home to shoot well. And playing at home doesn't mean he'll shoot well. But for him to shoot well, he basically has to be playing at home. And then you overlap that condition with the fact that he's going to play well against teams that don't have shot blocking or that have, that don't have a rim presence because he's not crafty around the rim
Right.
and he's not good at absorbing contact and he's not getting the calls when he drives into centers. So when he's playing against these types of teams, I mean, he's smart, and I think a lot of people don't see this. He's smart at finding ways to score out of broken plays or out of kind of freelance scenarios. The problem is if there's a rim protector, he can't finish at the rim, and so he's either really hot from the mid range and three, or it's not going to go well. And so you have the first condition, which is playing at home. You have the second condition, which is not a great rim protector on the other side. And you have the third condition, which is he needs to be hot from three, and that will happen sometimes. Sometimes you'll have good games against players. I mean, just look at he had a good game, not this game, not the game before. Against the Sixers, I think he had a good So he had 31 against the Sixers, where he shot 10 2-pointers and at the rim, 8 of them were at the rim. He was 7 of 8 at the rim. Who's playing?
So.
Who's playing center for the Sixers?
Paul Reed in that game.
Not a rim protector, 6'8" guy, PJ Tucker style. Not not a threat there. And so that this is what I think. This is the reason he's playing so poorly so often is either he's hot from three, in which case it doesn't matter. And there's a lot of games where he's really hot from three, but he can't make anything inside the arc, which is really frustrating. There's the games against non-rim protectors, and then there's the game. Then the games have to be at home as well. So that's a lot of. He has like some very clear defining flaws that when you overlap them, they don't add up to a lot of teams in the league because he's not going to play non-shot blocking bigs at home very often.
And it would also explain why, to this theory, some of his better road games over the years, from my recollection, have actually been in Denver. And it could be because Jokic is not of that archetype. I mean, he's not a bad defender, but he's not, the shot blocker that just completely deters any drive. So, like he's generally better at home. And, anywhere, if he's making threes, then of course he's going to be viable. But if he's not shooting well and he doesn't have the confidence to finish at the rim and he's on the road, then, those are the ones that gets really, really sticky. That actually makes perfect sense.
So, I'm sure you could come up with a lot of alternative versions. This is just mine. And the other thing that I want to touch on, you talked about.
By the way, Friday will be an interesting test of this because Rudy Gobert is a rim protector, Timberwolves in town, but it's also in Houston. So how do those two get weighed? The obvious answer, I feel like, is do the first couple of threes and middies go in or not? Hopefully they do, and then he just sort of builds confidence and can, feed off of that without necessarily having to finish at the rim.
He's going to be guarded by Anthony Edwards. I'm not confident.
Oh, yeah.
And when it's not Anthony Edwards, it's going to be Jaden McDaniels, and we know how much, or Jaden or Jalen, the good one, and we know how he struggles with lengthy defenders, so I'm not too confident. But maybe he's hot from three, and none of these matters.
Doesn't matter because Sengun's about to cook Gobert anyway. So
yeah, and so the other thing I'll mention, that you touched on, as far as trades go, I'm more and more inclined towards. And then I know nobody wants to hear this, but what if we were actually sellers at the deadline, but just trade Shantait?
Well, I don't even consider that being a seller. I consider that just being sort of opportunistic. It's the right time to trade him contractually, and you need Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore. Yeah, that actually, I wouldn't consider that really selling. I think that's just sort of roster management. It's the time to move on from him to get peak value, and you have guys that are knocking on the door for more minutes.
I called it selling because I'm saying trade them for picks.
Yeah,
Don't trade them for
to help
another guy
replenish the war
that's
chest. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Don't
But
trade them
then,
for a guy
where I think
that's
we are
gonna
in
get traded
alignment
out.
for the reasons stated earlier, Amin and Cam breaking out, Brooklyn picks looking better. Yeah, replenish the war chest, or I shouldn't say replenish because it's in decent shape to begin with, but fortify the war chest, and then at that point be opportunistic. Just sort of have those in waiting and be ready to pounce for when. And this is the NBA. It's always a soap opera. There's always going to be a new situation. Just be ready to pounce, and be it this offseason, next deadline, 2025 offseason. It's not like the Rockets have to force this. They have a pretty long window. They're setting this up to be sustainable. And so the bottom line is, keep the assets you have, build that, and then just be ready to strike when the time is right.
Yeah, and then as far as the Nets pick goes, I got a mini rant about how the Nets pick's going to go
Let's do it.
because there's basically no upside. I mean, what is that? I was a big fan of the in-season tournament, but I think not the in-season tournament. Sorry, I was a big fan of the play-in tournament, but I think it needs to be restructured from two teams from each conference and just do it the next four teams cross like league-wide best records because it's absolutely shameful that a team like the Nets, who is not
Yeah.
competent at all, is going to assuredly make a play-in team because because the East is so bad and the Pistons are going to tank, the Wizards are going to tank, the Hornets are going to tank. I won't be surprised if the Raptors, like they did for Scotty Barnes, at some point decide to tank as well, especially after trading Pascal Siakam. The Bulls eventually, when they trade Levine, they will eventually get out of this, stage where randomly their team's cooking a little bit and beating some teams. Um, they're eventually going to go into a tank, even though they never quite do, but they'll never be worse. Like the Nets just not wanting to lose, no matter how bad their team is enough to make the play-in the East. And this is discounting the fact that they're ahead of the Hawks, who I'm already counting on the Hawks to be a little bit better and surpassing them. Even with the Hawks surpassing them, they can still get the 10 seed. And in contrast, when you look at the Western Conference, the Spurs are tanking, that's fine. The Blazers are tanking, that's fine. The Jazz will probably tank.
They're
But other
playing
than
well right
that,
now.
two teams out of the Grizzlies, the Warriors, the Lakers, the Suns, and the Rockets are not going to make the play-in, and these teams are miles better than the Brooklyn Nets, who are going to get a play-in spot just because in the wrong conference. We're going to have two teams that are the half stars that would be exciting to watch in a playoff setting, not make the playoffs because of the conference system, and this has been the case for a long time. But if we're going to make it this easy to get into the playoffs, whereas to a team could be, the 10th seed could be 10 games behind um, 7th seed in the standings at the end of the
Yeah.
season, and randomly go hot for 2 games
Yeah.
and make the playoffs ahead of them. It's a best of one.
Yep.
So I think it just would make a lot more sense, and you can make if you make the league wide, and if you make the next best four teams, then it would be the Suns, the Lakers, the Warriors, and at that point probably the Grizzlies that make the play-in, and you probably would not see the Brooklyn Nets or the Atlanta Hawks make it. You'd only see because there's a huge gap in the East where you have the Knicks at the 8th seed at 19 wins and 15 losses, which is a good team. They're a +4 on the win-loss column. And then you have the Nets behind them at 15 wins and 20 losses at a -5. It's a massive gap. This to say that basically no matter what, the Nets picks are not going to get any better than what it is currently. And even still, like it's not going to get better than 10 because of how many teams are taking, and we're still going to have to be nervous about the possibility of them randomly getting hot and getting into the playoffs for some reason, and the pick dropping all the way to 17 or not 17 to 15.
So I've got a little bit of a counter to that, though, and I'll try to make it quick because I know we're already well over an hour, so we need to wind this up down. We can pick up some of this in the coming episodes as we get closer to the trade deadline. I actually do think that, assuming there's no major injuries, there's a clear top 8 in the East. So I do think it's pretty unlikely for any of the teams at 9 or below even if Brooklyn stays in that simply because they're trying, which is a fair argument, to actually get into the playoffs. And unlike the NFL, we've had some of these discussions on Texans Twitter in recent weeks talking about obviously the trade for Will Anderson, which at this point is worth it because Will Anderson looks like a stud. But in terms of should the Rockets or should the Texans, excuse me, have traded their own pick or the one from Cleveland to Arizona to make that work, the future pick the next year, they obviously chose to trade the Cleveland pick instead of the Houston pick. Well, one thing that's I've pointed out a few times, and it's worth remembering, is that if, knock on wood, the Texans win at Indy on Saturday night and get into the playoffs, it's not a given that even though Cleveland has the better record, that pick is going to be worse, and that the Texans have a worse pick than if they had just kept their own pick and sent the Cleveland one. No, because the NFL reseeds by round, if the Texans end up winning their first round game and the Browns do not, then that changes the draft picks to where, everything is slotted by record relative to, the round that a team goes through. So if you end up advancing to different rounds, even if a team has a worse record for the season, then the team who advanced deeper in the playoffs is going to have the worst draft pick. The NBA is not like that. And the reason I bring that up in the context of this Nets pick is even if they get in the play-in tournament, as long as they don't actually win the play-in tournament, and they'd be on the road, I don't think they will because the top top 8 in the East, Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, Miami, Indiana, Orlando, Cleveland, New York, I think they're all fairly set, all have positive point differentials. Assuming they can't actually do that, then even if the Nets sort of fluke their way in because of those dynamics, then as long as they don't win the play-in tournament, it's not like they would then be, 13 or 14 because they got into the play-in tournament. They would then, their pick would be ahead of even teams in the West, like you were describing. There's going to be 2 quality Western Conference teams that don't make the play-in tournament that probably have a better record than the Nets do. Well, the Nets pick actually would. The Nets would not be grandfathered into a higher pick simply because they made the play-in tournament. So that's the one thing that I would sort of toss out as sort of a counter to what you're saying. It's not that you're wrong, and it will put a bit of a ceiling on the pick in terms of it being at 9 or 10. But I also think it's a pretty high floor. As long as the Nets don't bring in a superstar, and thankfully, Donovan Mitchell, for reasons we've discussed in the past, seems the most realistic. But at this point, my bet is he stays in Cleveland for at least the season. Then I think the upside is limited. You're probably not, unless you get really lucky in the lottery, although it is a reweighted lottery, so you never know, but you're probably not going to get a super high pick. But I do think there's a fairly high floor as well, because I have a tough time seeing Brooklyn actually advance through the play-in tournament. And as long as they don't, then there's no reseeding in the NBA, and they'll drop right back to the 9 through 11 range that they've been in recent days. So to me, that's actually something of a silver lining.
Yeah, you're right. I did not mention the reseeding. You're right about that one. I forgot about it, which does mitigate a lot of what I said. It's still, they're going to get a shot when they really
They'll get a
should have.
shot.
We're going to have to hold our
out.
breaths for a little
for at
bit
least
longer.
1 game. Yeah.
But the other thing that I'll bring up about the Nets pick is, I think if it stays at 10, we're right on the verge of what's probably going to be a teardrop. So I think the Rockets should either draft a backup center, Donovan Clingan comes to mind, or they should trade the pick for a couple of future first round picks, which is usually what you get at this range. And I know this draft's not great, but I think that you can name 10 guys that teams would give up 2 first round picks to draft, between Ron Holland, and this might not be the order when the draft comes, but Ron Holland, Sarr, Reset. I'm usually good with names. I can't. Buselis, Topic, Jacoby Walter, Reed Shepard, Isaiah Collier, I don't know, Klingon, and Rob Dillingham. I would guess teams will give up 2 first round picks, especially rebuilding teams, to trade up to get these guys. So I think there will be opportunity to punt the picks moving forward. And if you don't draft a rookie this year, which the Rockets, unless it's a backup pick, probably really shouldn't, because they have young talent at those positions that is better than what they're going to be drafting, you're actually going to go into next year. So the calendar flips, 1 more pick becomes tradable 7 years down the line, and the Rockets move from what is currently a neutral if they trade this pick for 2 future firsts, they go from what is currently a neutral to a +2, which means
Interesting.
7 years, which means nine first round picks, which usually means what, 6 tradable in for, 6 tradable and 3 swaps available. So they actually, if they manage to do that, they would be up there. Obviously not with the Thunder, but they would be up there
Yeah.
They would rise a little bit as far as teams that are able to make a start trade package go. So unless and even if they're in a position to draft a guy like Donovan Clingan, they will have the MLE next year, and they don't really have much to spend it on. Then they'll have the non-tax MLE, which is the big one now. Or it's always been the big one, but they could go after, looking at the center class next year. You got Drummond, who a lot of people are like currently. You got JaVale McGee. No, probably not the sexiest names, but you also have Isaiah Hartenstein, which would make a lot of sense for this team. Can do a little bit of the dribble handoffs, can be a little bit of a rim protector, is already familiar with the Rockets. If you want to go the rim protection route, Isaiah Hartenstein. Nick Claxton's a free agent, but I doubt he goes for the MLE. And then you could also go the route of getting another. You could go the rim protection route in the draft and in free agency with Klingon in the draft and Isaiah Hartenstein in free agency.
When the
Or you
Nets
could
flame
go.
out, you can trade for Brook Lopez. Kidding. Pretty sure that bridge is burned
Oh
forever.
no. No. I was going to say you can go the rim protection route, or if you want to get a mini Sengun for the second unit, you're gonna have Olynyk as a free agent, and you could draft Filipowski out of Duke if you wanted to go through the same route through the draft. So they have a lot of, just to say, they have a
Yeah.
lot of flexibility, no matter what type of player they're looking for to back up Sengun.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should also note this will be our final anecdote on this pod because we'll have more trade talk in the weeks leading up to the trade deadline in early February. But as we've discussed in the past, the Rockets still have 3 second-round picks in this year's draft, and they really don't have that much room on their roster to fit all of those guys. So beyond wanting to keep first-round picks for the future, if at all possible, for all the flexibility reasons we've described, I also think they're going to be very incentivized to do one of those 3 or 4-for-1 deals that are becoming more popular with second round picks, just because they have 3 picks this year. They're not going to be able to roster all of those guys. So to me, that's a pretty obvious move. If they are going to upgrade, it's sort of who can you get for a bunch of seconds rather than a first.
Yeah, and then just a quick thing, as we were talking about Brook Lopez, as we're recording, he just got dunked on by Wemby. So I know Wemby is public enemy number 1, but I guess we can celebrate that public enemy number 2.
Oh, absolutely. Brook Lopez is actually public enemy number 1. Wemby, it's all fun and games. It's the next generation. Brook Lopez is the guy who I think we could actually, let's be blunt. Bobby Marks of ESPN was on 790 Thursday afternoon, and he said it outright. There was a deal. They had an agreement between Brook and the Rockets. So, if you renege on your verbal with the team, that's beyond just typical fan stuff and Wemby, looking happy when the Rockets got their card pulled out at number 4. Yeah, if you actually renege on an agreement and pull out, then that actually is public enemy number 1. So, Brook Lopez getting dunked on, even if it's Wemby, I'm all on board, man.
Hey, man, the logger line had it first. I don't care.
There we go. All right. And even if we walked it back a little bit, because let's be real, there's some sensitivities when making those types of allegations. We knew it, and it's been reported on a lot since. It's very real. Good news, has a happy ending, and that honestly the Rockets are probably better off this way. It gave me an opportunity to play Sengun even more, to lean into him more, and now it looks like, as we described leading off the pod, and I guess now takes it full circle, looks like he's an all-star and maybe even a max player as soon as later this year. So all's well that ends well, and even though Brook Lopez screwed over the Rockets, well, I guess he didn't actually screw over the Rockets. He went back on his word, but who knows, maybe Brook Lopez saved the Rockets. So depending on how all this turns out, maybe we'll eventually say thank you, although I'm sure there will be no warm feelings every time he's in the building at Toyota Center after what he pulled. From a business standpoint, even if it's better for the team, you don't forget when someone lies to your face and misleads you, and I think that's the way the Rockets look at Brook these days. Anyway, with that, we'll bring this episode to a close. We've been sort of all over the map, but I think that's to be expected. We're sort of a long-winded show anyway, and then we go 2 weeks without an episode. Come on, guys, what can you expect? I promise we'll be a bit more tailored in our commentary in future shows as we review not just the day in, day out games, but also any rumors that leak about what the Rockets are looking at doing or not doing leading up to the February trade deadline about a month or so from now, just over a month, I believe. Anyway, we'll table all of that for another day. For tonight, I think that's enough. Paolo, I think you had a shout out you wanted to give.
Yeah, man, we need to send all of the good vibes and the good luck to the Texans. They play their first, I'll call it a playoff game, and CJ Stroud's back, so it's gonna be hype on Sunday.
On Saturday,
It's actually
Saturday night. By the way, what's hilarious, I didn't even realize this while I was saying it, but talking about being uncomfortable every time Brook Lopez comes to Toyota Center, Brook Lopez's one visit is actually this Saturday night when Milwaukee is here. And the sad thing, not that many people are going to be watching it live, or if they do, it'll be on a second screen because it's the same time as the Texans' de facto playoff game against the Colts. Winner keeps playing, loser goes home. So yeah, shout out to CJ Stroud for good luck, and definitely not a shout out to Brook Lopez. Hopefully somebody from the Rockets dunks on him in his Houston return to show him what he's missing out on. Although, of course, he's still winning a lot in Milwaukee. It's a really good team to be expected. Come on, it's Giannis and Dame. But hopefully the Rockets maybe can find a little extra incentive from seeing Brook Lopez at their place. And boy, if the Rockets can beat Brook on Saturday night and the Texans clinch a playoff spot, that would be an amazing night. So hopefully we have a lot to celebrate late Saturday. Stay tuned. Anyway, we'll recap all of that in our next show next week, date to be determined. For now, we'll actually finally bring this to a close. For Paolo Alves, I'm Ben Dubose. As mentioned off the top, if you want more from us between episodes, the best place to get it is on Twitter. Paolo's on there at Paolo Alves NBA. I'm on Twitter or X at Ben Dubose. You can also read my work at USA Today's Rockets Wire, rocketswire.usatoday.com, at Sports Talk, and on Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of the team. But if you want to access my work, our work, or just find out more about this show and its partner sponsors, obviously Carbach Brewing, this show is put on with support from them and their beer, Clutch City Lager, developed in collaboration from the Rockets. All the information you need on that, as well as our individual distributors like Apple, Google, Spotify. The one-stop shop for that is the link tree at the Lager Line on Twitter/X. You go to twitter.com/the Lager Line, you hit up the link tree in the bio. You can find the distributors, you can find the partners, the sponsors, us, whatever you need. That is the one-stop shop. The Lager Line on Twitter/X. Hit up that link tree and you can find whatever you need. The more you support the friends, partners, and sponsors of the show, as well as just us, the better we're going to be and the more able we're going to be to provide episodes in the future. All right, with those plugs complete, we'll finally put a bow on this. Again, for Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Lager Line.